sun bathed Emily Carter's backyard in golden light as she knelt beside her lush vegetable garden. Rows of tomatoes, crisp lettuce, juicy cucumbers, and fragrant herbs thrived under her care. She wiped the sweat from her brow, feeling the deep satisfaction of growing her own food, a simple joy in her otherwise hectic life. Her small suburban home in Willow Creek, a picturesque but rigidly controlled HOA neighborhood, had always felt like a haven, but lately it was becoming a battleground. Emily's troubles started 3 weeks ago when she received the first letter from the Homeowners Association, HOA. Dear Miss Carter, your backyard garden is in violation of Willow Creek HOA Policy 17. B. Prohibited landscaping. You are required to remove it within 7 days to avoid fines. Emily had scoffed at the notice. Prohibited landscaping? What kind of rule was that? She had read the HOA bylaws before buying her house, and nothing had mentioned vegetable gardens. Her next-door neighbor, Mr. Reynolds, a retired history teacher with a fondness for bird-watching, leaned over the fence. I saw the letter, he said. Utter nonsense. They're targeting you because you're the first person to grow something other than their overpriced HOA-approved grass. Emily rolled her eyes. I'm not giving in. This is my property, and they can't tell me what to do with my backyard. But she underestimated the HOA's determination. A second letter arrived, then a third, each more aggressive than the last, warning of escalating fines, legal action, and even property liens if she didn't comply. Then, last week, Richard Langley, the smug, power-hungry HOA president, showed up at her door in his perfectly pressed polo shirt and khaki pants. Miss Carter, he said, flashing an artificial smile, I hope we can resolve this issue amicably. Rules exist for a reason. Emily crossed her arms. Tell me, Mr. Langley, what's so offensive about fresh vegetables? His smile thinned. It's about uniformity, property values, and neighborhood standards. Vegetable gardens attract pests. They disrupt the aesthetic, and they encourage an alternative lifestyle that isn't in line with Willow Creek's vision. Emily almost laughed. An alternative lifestyle? You mean growing my own food instead of relying on grocery stores? You have 48 hours to remove it. His tone turned cold. If you don't, the HOA will handle it. Emily refused. She wouldn't let a group of self-important busybodies dictate what she could do on her own land. But she never expected just how far the HOA would go. Emily was exhausted. After another long night researching property rights and HOA overreach, she had finally drifted off to sleep with a plan forming in her mind. She was ready to fight back. That morning, she left for work feeling confident. She had scheduled a meeting with a lawyer later that week and was planning to gather neighborhood support to challenge the HOA's ridiculous rule. But Emily had no idea that while she was at work, the real battle was about to begin. The attack. At precisely 11:45 a.m., a group of men in neon vests and work boots arrived in front of Emily's house. They weren't city workers. They weren't landscapers she had hired. They were HOA enforcers. Leading them was none other than Richard Langley, the smug HOA president. He stood on the sidewalk, arms crossed, watching as his team of hired workers marched into Emily's backyard with shovels, rakes, and hedge trimmers. One of the workers, a burly man with a sun-worn face, hesitated. You sure about this? The homeowner ain't here. Shouldn't we? Langley cut him off. She was warned. We're within our rights. Now get to it. And then the destruction began. With ruthless efficiency, they started ripping out the garden Emily had spent months nurturing. tomato plants yanked from the soil and tossed into garbage bags like common weeds. Rows of lettuce stomped into the dirt by heavy boots. Cucumber vines hacked apart with hedge trimmers. Emily's beloved herb garden flattened with shovels, scattering rosemary, basil, and thyme into the wind. Neighbors gathered in shock. Mr. Reynolds stormed outside. "This is insane. You can't just destroy someone's property." Langley didn't even flinch. Ms. Carter was given multiple warnings. "This is enforcement of HOA policy." An elderly woman down the street, Mrs. Martinez, clutched her chest. "But it's just a garden. Why does it matter?" Langley smirked. "Rules are rules." Emily returns home. At 5:30 p.m., Emily pulled into her driveway, humming along to the radio, feeling a sense of hope. That hope vanished instantly when she stepped out of her car. She froze, staring at her backyard in absolute horror. Her beautiful garden gone. The soil was torn up, piles of uprooted plants sat in black garbage bags, and the wooden planter boxes had been smashed to pieces. Her breath caught in her throat as rage flooded her veins. Then she saw something even worse. A bright red notice was nailed to the fence. "Unauthorized landscaping removed per HOA policy. Further violations will result in additional penalties." Emily's hand shook as she ripped the paper down. She heard laughter. Turning her head slowly, she spotted Richard Langley standing on his perfectly manicured lawn across the street, arms crossed, wearing his usual smug expression. He raised a hand in a mocking wave. "Told you we'd handle it." Emily's vision blurred with fury. She had never felt this angry in her entire life. She took a deep breath, clenched her fists, and made a silent vow. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The next morning, Emily didn't cry. She didn't scream. She planned. She sat at her kitchen table, sipping a strong cup of coffee, staring at the ruined garden through her window. The HOA thought they had won, but they had underestimated her. By noon, she was in action mode. She made 3 phone calls, one to her lawyer, one to a local news station, and one to an online community of homeowners fighting back against HOA abuse. She dug through county records and discovered something interesting. The HOA had no actual legal authority to enforce landscaping changes on backyards, only front yards. She printed out copies of the HOA bylaws and highlighted every inconsistency she found. She visited every neighbor on her street, collecting signatures for a petition against the HOA's excessive rules. And then she set her trap. Public humiliation. The next day, Emily stood in front of her home, waiting. At 3 p.m. sharp, Richard Langley and the HOA board members arrived for their monthly neighborhood inspection. Emily greeted them with a smile. Langley sneered. "Ah, Miss Carter, here to finally accept that rules exist for a reason." Emily raised her eyebrows. "Actually, I'm here to discuss violations of your own policies." She reached into her bag and pulled out a thick stack of papers, copies of the HOA's own bylaws, proving that they had no legal right to destroy her garden. Pictures of other homeowners with non-regulation landscaping, including Langley's own backyard, which had an illegal fountain feature. A petition with over 50 signatures from residents who were sick of the HOA's ridiculous control. Langley's smirk faded. Then Emily pulled out her phone and hit play. A news segment popped up on the screen showing a local reporter standing in front of Emily's roosted garden. Willow Creek HOA under fire for destroying a homeowner's vegetable garden. Residents say the rules are out of control should homeowners be forced to comply with arbitrary regulations. Langley's face turned red. The neighbors who had gathered to watch started murmuring. Some even pulled out their phones to take videos. Emily leaned in. "Here's the deal, Richard." Her voice was calm but deadly serious. "You're going to publicly apologize. You're going to issue an HOA-wide rule change allowing backyard gardens, and you're going to cover the cost of every single plant you destroyed. If you don't, I'll see you in court, and I'll make sure this HOA crumbles under lawsuits, media coverage, and public outrage." Silence. Langley looked around. His own board members were shifting uncomfortably. The neighbors were glaring at him. The cameras were rolling. Finally, his jaw clenched. "Fine," he muttered. "The HOA will revise the rules." Emily smiled. "And?" Langley took a deep breath and forced out the words, "I apologize for the destruction of your garden. Victory is sweet." 2 weeks later, Emily's garden was reborn. She replanted everything, this time with help from the entire neighborhood. Dozens of people showed up to support her. Even Mr. Reynolds brought fresh compost. And the best part, her fight had inspired others. The HOA had lost control. Other homeowners started making small changes, adding flower beds, painting doors different colors, setting up little backyard gardens. Emily had done more than just win back her garden. She had taken back power from the HOA, and as she stood in her lush, thriving backyard, watching the sunset, she knew one thing for sure: no one was ever going to push her around again.